Okay, backtracking from the previous segment that we've just talked about, there are a few documents that happen at the beginning of your existence on paper. The statement of birth, which is, if we want to look at it, this record actually authenticated, we'll just say that it looks like this in its form, just for reference. This is just an example. I have no problem you looking at this record. It wouldn't matter. I'm not trying to hide behind anything. This is all I know, and this is all that was provided, so therefore I can't change the fact that this was filled out. This happened with or without my consent. I was only a child. Statement of birth equal in its format to the baptismal record of the church. So they're in equal standing because there are many people that do not technically get baptized in a church, and therefore this document that usually carries a watermark on it in most places, I haven't reviewed every one, so I'm only looking at it from the Ontario standpoint of the province of Ontario, Canada, has a watermark of which they've placed the birth record on top. And therefore this document is how it comes about. So I would literally understand that the given name being the baptismal name that's on this document, also with the watermark on there, would be symbolism of this nation baptizing you. Agree or disagree, do your research. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to help you. So therefore, please do your research on it and do your own due diligence.
Dan, before you go on, just want to make it clear that on that original long form statement of birth, there is no picture of the child, and obviously the child could never sign it, nor could a child even contract.
That's right. So in law, you can never harm a child. You can never identify a child. Therefore, the original standard booklet that went to instruct people that were in government trust positions to do birth registration stated the fact that no individual was ever identified in any of these records.
And the Registrar General has kindly provided us several letters where she makes it clear that the Office of the Registrar General does not register people.
Exactly. So if they're not registering people, they're registering an event. They're registering a birth event, and everything is based on events. We usually put a birth event in the newspaper, a death or a marriage as an event, and therefore this is a birth event, and this document covers that. At the same end, there's some key things to remember on this document, one being the seal of the minister is outside the frame. They are not endorsing this record, and in fact you'll find that this record's not even witnessed. So therefore it's not even a proper statement in law. Because a statement or a affidavit would require someone to be witnessing the document at the time someone signed it. And generally, even to make it more solidified under the common law, usually at the mouth of two witnesses a matter is established. There isn't really two witnesses going on because generally either one birth parent is the informant or there is someone else from a hospital jurisdiction there that may actually be taking over a position to actually record the birth of the child. But in any sense, what we're looking at here, as a document that can be used as an affidavit or a statement of claim, there is nobody witnessing this document generally at the time that the parent signs or the hospital authority. It appears that someone signs after the fact, not before, not during the fact of this document. So the dates don't correspond, and in fact the minister of the government who eventually takes the birth record seals or basically puts a seal on the record being a copy of a record, only stating that it's a record, not saying that they're verifying or endorsing the content of the record.
Another important factor, I think, is to realize that the piece of paper that you just held up is a copy, not an original, and you will never get to see the original.
And exactly, it says here, certified A-true photostatic print of a record. It just says it's a print of a record, not the record. Therefore, it is not the original. You've never seen the original, and I try to let people understand this slowly, that if you've never seen the original, you do not even have the ability to say that you know that this record that's on here is actually what it is, because you've never seen it. And in fact, the minister here is just saying this is a record, not the record. And they're not even endorsing the record itself. The Deputy Registrar General is not endorsing this record. They're endorsing that it is a record that someone has placed on file. The concern that I found with this record is the fact that most of the statement of births are underlined where it says the surname. And most people do not understand the history of surnames. Surnames being occupational names. Usually there are many categories of what an addition added to a name was, and that's what a surname was. It went beyond the Christian name or given name. Therefore, went beyond the facts. And it was later assumed to identify someone, usually for a place or an occupation in general, or a family ancestry. But surnames are like coats of arms. And coats of arms basically are very, very symbolic, because a coat of arms is like someone bearing arms. You carry it. But if you do not have the authority to carry something such as that, there could be a concern that maybe you're assuming something that you don't understand the actual authority that you are taking on by assumption, or the claim you're making, or the duty you may be imposing upon yourself. And therefore, the concern with this is, when we went through most understanding on surnames, we went to Gentile, which meant unbeliever, meant uncovenanted nation, meant pagan, heathen, and therefore those terms kind of concern me as a Christian. Why would there be a Christian given name and then a surname? And how could the two actually ever really be joined together, when usually on the birth records they were separated, they were distinguished from each other? One was below in subjection and one was overhead. And the fact that they underlined was a very concern, because that's like a stress put on a document. A lineage, a lineage. And could I really prove that? Well, I've talked to most people, and they would say that they really don't have too much verification that that birth name, record, surname, is really verifiable within their family, because most people generally didn't keep accurate records. And people could take on surnames and adopt names and take on names at any given time at the whim of society. Therefore, they were never really in authority. It was kind of like someone's imagination. And I was concerned about that, because a given name is a gift. It's something the parents give. It comes from life itself and thought. And it doesn't have this the semblance of anything to do with something that describes or adds something to the name. And so therefore, in its pure form, it's like kind of one is the given name. But when you start adding something to something, it's not the same anymore. And therefore, most of the time, people were noted by their occupational names. Surnames, place, such as Judas Iscariot. He was from Iscariot. It was a town, a place. Or it was Jim Taylor or John Smith. These were like shortened from blacksmith, or the occupation of someone being a tailor, or someone who did something in an occupation to describe what he was. But it really didn't make him any more than what he was. It was to describe what he was going to do for monetary reasons, more than not, and for taxation purposes. My concern was that as a Christian, it said, according to the Bible, that in Colossians, that Jesus blotted out the penalty of the handwritten ordinances of the man-made law. That means he wiped it out, he canceled it. And when you see a mark like this on a document, whether it be like a check and you put a line through it, that in itself would tell you that's a cross. And therefore, it's blotting something out, canceling something. And so in this document, even though it may look like you have this overhead placed upon you that you couldn't really verify and you could never be responsible for as a child, this document seems to put a line to really mark that. And that's on the majority of statement of births today. It doesn't matter where you're from. The odds are, if you've had a record in the last probably 30 to 40 years, there'll be an underlined stress on that overhead. This one document is actually even further descriptive of the information that I'm trying to provide for you, which deals with the fact that the bottom it says for office notation only. Notation means in error under the Vital Statistics Act for most of the nations that are basically running on this system. I can't speak for every nation. I'm only dealing with what I found within Ontario. And I think that's enough to stand right now because we're dealing with a lot of people born in Ontario. So let's just look at people born in Ontario. Do your own research if you're from another state regarding the United States, or if you're from Australia or some other established democracy that's operating right now within the nations that have treaty arrangements. That word office notation was stamped on a separate date, noting that there was an error and an alteration put on this document. Well, there couldn't be any greater alteration put on this document than the fact that there has been a change made. Because a child could never bear arms nor consult to join from Christianity and join to a secular nation. And there is a difference between Christianity and the Christian state and that of the secular state. So there is a difference and a separation between church and state on this document.
And do you believe that's the reason that there is a division register on there? Are they dividing something?
Certainly something is going on there, because the last one to sign off, who has no authority to create a birth certificate or a birth registration, is the division registrar. So there is something going on here. Maybe it's symbolic of what was condemned in the Old Testament, which was called divination. I can't be certain on that, but it certainly concerns me that we always have heard the statement, a nation divided will fall. And why would there be a division? Why is there something going on here? Why is the fact that the surname, being a coat of arms, would generally come under federal jurisdiction? And if I basically am bearing an arms, a surcoat, something added to the name placed overhead, then there could be a responsibility later that I would assume this, even though there is no indication anywhere on this document of any direction, under any circumstance, for me to sign for this name. It appears even the minister of the government is signing outside this document, not inside.
Is it even a real minister? Because it's come to our attention and knowledge that the individual characters making up the name are a cipher, and it appears that the person that we assumed it to be is not even a man or woman.
You're making an extremely good observation. We have spent time on that, and the strangest thing came by me. I was at a bookstore, and we kind of overlook things during our little journeys into the world of knowledge. And I was in a bookstore where I had come across a book being thrown away on a pile, and it was an old shorthand book, shorthand writing, which most legal secretaries did. And when I started to research into it, I found a phonetic code that looked like hieroglyphics that went beyond the idea of letters to actually spell out a name. It actually told them what the sound was to make a symbol, which would place a cipher to represent something. And what I found was that these ministers of the government, and I'm not here to condemn them or do anything of that because I'm here in peace. All I found by my observation was that it appears their signatures were shorthand ciphers, and therefore were not what people would generally think as just a plain old signature placed by somebody.